these things aren't really diseases, they're actually toxicities. And so you're getting this toxic byproduct, toxic sort of results of eating carbohydrates, eating sugar, drinking alcohol. That toxicity manifests as what we call type 2 diabetes. Okay, so you remove the toxin, the toxicity goes away. When you remove all that and you go to a carnivore diet and you remove all, you can even do it with a ketogenic diet, just no carbohydrates or sugar or alcohol. People recover very, very well. Their blood sugars stabilize. Their peripheral insulin resistance can actually start to reverse as well. And they come off their medications, they come down on their insulin if they're insulin dependent as well.
What is diabetes?
So there's a few different kinds of diabetes, but traditionally they're referred to as type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, so type 1 diabetes used to be called juvenile diabetes because we generally saw this in the young, and this is when your body stops producing insulin for some reason. It's thought to be possibly autoimmune, possibly your body after a viral infection has it's called molecular mimicry, where your body has antibodies towards something like a virus or some other sort of pathogen, and then that's close enough to these beta islet cells in your pancreas that make insulin that it attacks those as well. So that's sort of what we're thinking now, but we're not 100% sure.
So sorry to interrupt, is type 1 diabetes, is that caused by lifestyle, or is that sort of something generally outside of people's control?
It's thought to be outside of people's control. It's thought to be through molecular mimicry or some sort of autoimmune issue. But obviously, as we've spoken about, and I've spoken about on my autoimmune episode, it's possible that autoimmune issues can be precipitated by environment as well. And so the things that we eat and the things that we do can help stop that. Now, once your body has attacked your beta islet cells for whatever reason, that they're generally thought to be gone. However, there are some studies in animal models showing that might actually be able to be reversed actually through diet as well, and diet and fasting, called the fasting mimicking diet, which we can get to. Just to finish with the definitions, type 2 diabetes was previously called adult onset diabetes. In about the 1990s, you had a bunch of kids getting adult onset diabetes, and so they had to rename it instead of actually thinking for half a second and realizing that something was going on that was causing this. So type 2 diabetes is traditionally thought of as peripheral insulin resistance. So you have years and years and years of eating too many carbohydrates and sugar, drinking alcohol, and this sets in motion. You're having high blood sugar all the time, and your body needs more and more insulin, and you actually get peripheral insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, where the high insulin levels are actually causing harm in your body. High blood sugar is causing harm in your body by direct damage by glycating and glycosylation to various molecules. So over the years, you develop peripheral insulin resistance, and now you need more and more insulin to get the same result, just like any sort of drug tolerance issue. You need more and more and more to get the same sort of result. And so eventually they might need to go on insulin as well. That is more thought to be more lifestyle, and you can manage this with diet and exercise. But it's still thought to be a progressive disease, that this only gets worse. It doesn't get better. But of course, in the carnivore community, we actually see this absolutely reversing, people coming off their oral medications, coming off the massive doses of insulin, and at least coming down to a minimal dose of insulin, which is also what we're seeing in the type 1 community as well. Their blood sugars are much easier to control because their body's making the exact amount of blood sugar that they need. They're not having these big swings because of what they're eating and have to take fast acting insulins. They can just take their low dose background level of insulin, and because their body's producing constant levels of blood sugar and glycogen, that's all you need. You don't need these breakthrough medications and these fast acting insulins.
Sure. So Carnivore has been shown to help with both type 1 and type 2. Was that kind of what you're alluding to there?
Yeah, well, it's certainly in symptom management.
Okay.
and certainly in progression and the amount of medications that you need. So for type 1, its major benefit that we're seeing now is that it gets people on a minimal dose of insulin, and they don't need to use all the fast acting insulins, and that you can get very difficult situations where you get hypoglycemic, and you'll have drops, and these are dangerous. You can die from this. And so when you're toying around with your insulin all day, and people get very good at this and practiced at it, so issues can be kept to a minimum. But you do have to be very careful, and especially like teenagers and kids, they really don't like it. They don't like it that they have to do this, and they sort of rebel against it and say, well, I'm not going to do that, and they end up really hurting themselves. With type 2 diabetes, it is actually reversing the disease process.
Yeah, wow.
And as I talk about in other things, that's because these things aren't really diseases; they're actually toxicities, and so you're getting this toxic byproduct, these toxic sort of results of eating carbohydrates, eating sugar, drinking alcohol, and that toxicity manifests as what we call type 2 diabetes. Okay, so you remove the toxin, the toxicity goes away, and so that's what we see, this sort of reversible situation. Okay, so when you remove all that and you go to a carnivore diet and you remove all, you can even do it with a ketogenic diet, just no carbohydrates or sugar or alcohol. People recover very, very well. Their blood sugars stabilize. Their peripheral insulin resistance can actually start to reverse as well. And they come off their medications. They come down on their insulin if they're insulin dependent as well. My mother is a perfect example of that. She was type 2 diabetic for 25 years, off and on, good or bad control, mostly not the best. And her HbA1c, which is a marker of how well you're doing in controlling your blood sugar over the course of 3 months, was fairly high. And she was on 3 oral medications and on a high dose of her background insulin, because she was now insulin dependent because her pancreas had burnt out at that point. And 2 months on a high-fat carnivore diet, she came off all 3 of her medications and reduced her insulin down to the minimal dose of 14 units for Lantus. And her HbA1c went from 8.9, which is quite high, down to 6.1, which is the upper limit of normal for a non-diabetic. Okay, and her doctor just looked at her and said, "How the hell did you do this? What the hell did you do?"
Did she tell them?
Yeah, she did. Yeah, but her doctor's saying, like, look, this is a progressive disease. This only gets worse. We can mitigate this and slow it down with diet and lifestyle and medication, but this only gets worse. This doesn't just go away. How the hell did you do this? And my mom told her, it's like, well, Anthony's been doing a lot of research into this. He thinks that we're actually carnivores, and that's the type of animal that we are. And when we eat outside of that, this is what's causing these problems. And just going into the whole bit. And she said, she was interested in that, and so I went in and spoke to her for like an hour and a half. Just sort of took over my mom's.
So you went in and spoke doctor to doctor.
Yeah, exactly. And we just spoke and ended up talking for like an hour and a half. Took up a lot of her time, but her and her PA were very, very interested in talking about all these sorts of things. And she's a very bright lady. She's an MD PhD from Harvard. She has a PhD in biochemistry from Harvard. And I just said, I was like, look, we're looking at biochemistry all wrong. We call this a fed state and it's a fasting state. I completely disagree. I think the so-called fasting state is our primary metabolic state. That's where all of our heavy machinery comes to bear. This is the metabolic state of animals in the wild because they're all fat driven. They don't eat carbs. Wolves don't eat carbo load before they chase caribou for 10 hours. And they do great. We have studies going back to 1981 looking at wolves, checking their blood sugar, checking their glycogen. And it's just rock solid. The thought was at the time, you have to eat carbs to burn carbs. And they found out, well, no, actually you don't. And so, the only reason that we call one a fed state and the other a fasting state is because by the time we were able to look at our biochemistry at a molecular level, everyone was eating carbohydrates. So, it was just natural. It said, oh, when you eat, your metabolism looks like this. And when you don't eat, it looks like this. It's like, yeah, but when you eat anything except carbohydrates, it also looks like this. And this is again, where all of our heavy machinery come to bear, our body starts making blood sugar, making glycogen, making ketones, and it's very exacting. It's so well controlled, like anything else we see in our body. So it's it's very natural for me to look at that and be like, okay, that makes sense, that's our natural state, as opposed to an insulin driven state where that's blocking off all the mechanics of your.
Yeah, let's dig into this a little bit more so that your average person can understand. So you're sort of differentiating between a fed state and a fasted state, and what are the kind of indicators that we use for a fed state? And I'm putting this in speech marks because this is kind of a term that seems to have been invented to suit carbohydrate consumption. So what are kind of the markers of that?
Well, so and yeah, you're right. I mean, because that's everyone calls it, oh, this is a fed state, that's fasting. And people that have taken biochemistry, people don't think that, well, that's just what it is. It's in a textbook and a discussion. But of course, that's nonsensical. There's plenty of things that have been in textbooks that came out eventually. So when you're in a so-called fed state, you're in an insulin driven state. So your blood sugar goes up, you eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes up. This sparks insulin. And so the thought was like, oh, well, this is a normal process. You put in the blood sugar and then your insulin goes up and this brings it down. And this is a normal thing. You have this up and down.
And that's meant to happen 5 times a day as you eat your 5 meals throughout the day.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
6.
because we didn't know, and just everyone who ate food, this is what it looked like. And then after you didn't eat for 24 hours, it switched to this other one. But that's it. It's quite simplistic. So when you put in exogenous carbohydrates, when you eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes up. But blood sugar, as I alluded to earlier, causes direct damage to your body. So by a process called glycosylation or glycation, these glucose molecules physically fuse to other molecules. This is part of heart disease, where these things fuse onto like SD-LDL, certain types of cholesterol, and they make them defunct, and your liver can't take them up, and only their macrophages can take them up, and they turn into these big foam cells. Then you add that to arterial wall damage, and these things can actually get in there through the cracks of these damage, because that's what they're designed to do. They're designed to go in and fix damage and fight bacteria. And all of a sudden they just turn into these bigger and bigger plaques. So, and there's a whole massive disease process that goes along with it, but that's some parts. So it's not the cholesterol that's a problem. It's actually the glycation of the cholesterol, of certain cholesterols that you get when you're eating fructose and sugar and alcohol. So when you're in that state, blood sugar is at too high of a level is really bad for you. So this is what kills diabetics, just that simple fact that their blood sugar is up all the time. That's what breaks down their body. That's what gives them peripheral vascular disease, heart disease, neurological dysfunction, and so forth. Their body just breaks down from the inside out, and they have very hard lives if it's not well controlled. And that's it. And you control your blood sugar, it's like you don't have diabetes, because it's the blood sugar that's causing harm.
Yeah. And so am I right in saying these diabetics, they're in the fed state all the time, because they're constantly getting this blood sugar spike from the exogenous carbohydrates, which is a good way to describe it, because most people would think that carbohydrates can only be exogenous, that are constantly spiking the blood sugar and then triggering the insulin response. So it's just kind of, am I on the right track there?
Yeah, well, yeah, and they, most of us that aren't on a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet are in a this fed state, and this is where like intermittent fasting comes in, because you're just waiting out the clock on the insulin, and then your body gets back into its normal state. People feel a lot better. They can work out more, have better exercise tolerance. They go run marathons on their fasting day where they don't need anything that day, and so on. So they people already see the benefits of being in what I call our primary metabolic state. And so, when you have high blood sugar, and your insulin is going to be driven up defensively, because your body recognizes this is dangerous and is saying, okay, what the hell has this person done? Get that insulin up as quickly as possible. So your insulin slams up. Insulin blocks something called proteolysis and lipolysis, which are basically the ability for your body to break down proteins and fats in order to get energy. Okay, so in layman's terms, it forces energy into cells. It doesn't allow it to come out of cells. And so you're forcing all this energy because you have way too much, and your body's like, get this the hell out of here. And so you're just stuffing it in every cell in your body. It goes in the body and into muscle, into muscle and your brain and things like that, and different organs that you're using. But it also goes into places that you don't want. It stores it in glycogen, which is fine. You can use that later. And it stores it into fat, intramuscular fat, fat all around your body, but also intramuscular fat.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where like marbling on the cow comes from. This is why they give them grain, is to get that intramuscular fat. And so, we're doing that to ourselves. So people who eat carbohydrates and sugar, they have marbled muscle. And some bodybuilders and things like that say, oh, you have to eat carbs because it gives you that pump. Well, no, not really. It gives you excess glycogen and retained water and intramuscular fat.
Yeah,
so that's not actually healthy.
It's really helpful if you're trying to just take up as much space as you can, right?
Yeah,
rather than necessarily be as strong or as toned or as healthy or have that really tight look. If you're just purely trying to take up space, sure, go on.
Exactly. Some of these guys, they do a trip where they'll eat some carbohydrates and things like that right before their competition, and they'll just sort of swell up a bit, and if they want to do that, that's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
It's doing this bulking and cutting sort of thing. I think that's very counterproductive, because you're just filling your muscles up with glycogen and fat, and then that just has to go away eventually, and so you just lost it, and you're less healthy. So that's what it's doing in your fed state. And it's basically, you're just in damage control the whole time. Well, you can't, any system cannot be in damage control the whole time. It's going to start, falling apart at the side. So when you're in a fasting state, so-called fasting state, which I think is our main state, that doesn't happen. So insulin stays at a very low level, just enough to keep things working properly, but not so much that it shuts down your body's metabolic working. So now you can access your fat stores. Because when you're in the fed state, the carbohydrate state, you cannot access your fat stores.
Very important point that everyone should understand.
Yeah. So everything you eat goes into your fat, but now you cannot access your fat stores. So this is like filling up your car at the petrol station, gas station, and then just putting a cork in it so it can't go to your engine. It's like, oh no, this is just for when I get lost in the desert or something. Like, that doesn't make any damn sense. Your fat in your body is your gas tank. You eat food that fills up your gas tank. Now you run on your gas, petrol, for whoever's listening. And that's the state that you're in the so-called fasting state. And so now your body can use its energy. It can mobilize blood sugar, glycogen, ketones, all these sorts of things. Your brain's major energy source are ketones. As people think it's glucose, it's not. You do not run on glucose really when you're in the fasting state. You always run on ketones. Your brain always runs on ketones. And so this is actually something that's been theorized. There's a guy, Dr. Bickman from BYU, who has an Instagram page, really interesting stuff. He was talking about how Alzheimer's and so forth can actually be, it's actually thought of as, some people are calling it type 3 diabetes, which is what I've mentioned in other talks. So more of a metabolic issue that is similar to type 2 diabetes and so forth. And you can see this because they have peripheral insulin resistance in your brain as well. So you have insulin resistance. Now, your body can't get, blood sugar into these cells very well, can't utilize them very well. Your brain is also part of that. So now your brain's not really running on full steam. And so you start slowing down, and actually you can have people with these tangles and these plaques that are indicative of Alzheimer's. But if they don't have the peripheral insulin resistance and so forth, they don't actually get the disease. And so what's more important is your body's inability to get energy into your brain cells. And so when you go into a ketogenic diet, and there have been many studies showing that a high fat ketogenic diet actually is a better treatment modality for Alzheimer's than every other medication that's ever been trialed for Alzheimer's. Okay, and Dr. Bickman was saying that this is because when you go into a ketogenic state, now you switch over to ketones. Now your brain is getting a lot of ketones because your brain wants to run on ketones. It can run on glucose. It wants to run on ketones.
Yeah, I might just jump in there that anyone who's ever experienced ketosis, and particularly maybe for the first time, it was a pretty extreme experience for me. And I feel like, you tap into, it's like that movie Limitless with Bradley Cooper, and you've just got like this epic energy, and you're running nice and smooth, and you can concentrate and just keep on chugging. So yeah, I totally agree with you. If people want to be successful, you should be in a state of ketosis more, which is similar to this, what we're calling a fasted state, which it sounds like, doctors talk about it as if like, you could occasionally enter a fasted state, before a surgery or something, or, maybe do intermittent fasting. But the reality is that you could be in this fasted state all the time.
Well, you're supposed to be, I think.
You're supposed to be, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you look at all animals in the wild, like, almost all of them, they're all in this ketogenic starvation state. Like, okay, so, and people that don't really understand this, that just look at biochemistry and say, oh, fed state, fasting state, and just, there's always the things like, you can think outside the box. The box is, heretofore, prescribed, knowledge, right? So we're saying this is, in this box is fed state, fasting state. Okay, you think outside the box and say, well, actually it works better if you flip those two around, and say that the fasting state is actually a primary state, and the fed state is actually a pathological defense mechanism, your body trying to protect you from hyperglycemia. There's one more point about the so-called fed state. You're throwing energy into cells, you can't allow it to come out, so you can't access your fat cells, but it does something more insidious, which is it blocks a hormone called leptin, which I've spoken about before. Leptin is released from your stretch receptacles in your stomach, so when you eat a big meal, it stretches out and releases leptin, your body goes, oh, I'm full. But the majority of